Hello and welcome to We Are Nantucket. We are grateful to the Massachusetts Department of Education for their grant for the after-school programs and also to the Dreamland Theater Foundation. Who I am most grateful for are the students who have been doing the interviewing, learning the technique of interviews. I think the most important thing about this exercise and project is that the students learn to question and listen very carefully and ask follow-up questions of the adults, and they learn a lot of other people's experiences.
Hi, I'm Tomas Young. It is Sunday, January 8th, and today I have the honor of interviewing Miss Peggi Godwin.
Hi.
Where are you from, actually?
Well, I was actually born in Indiana and lived there until after college, and then moved to Rochester, New York. And then I moved to Tokyo, Japan, and then I moved to Boston, and then moved to Nantucket in 2000.
So I'm assuming that you're married?
I am.
So how'd you meet your special one?
Okay, that's a long way back. My husband and I met in the 7th grade, and we went to the same. We were in junior high, high school, college together.
What brought you to Nantucket?
We were living in Rochester, New York, and we had friends who had vacationed here. We had 2 young children, very young children. So we came for a week. We rented a house on Milk Street, and we had a wonderful time. However, it rained every day that we were here. And somehow that did not deter us. We fell in love with Nantucket, and we've come back every summer since until we moved here year-round.
Is there any interesting, fun family stories that you have?
Well, I have 2 children, and both are married, and I have 5 grandchildren. So my children grew up coming to Nantucket. And I mentioned the first time we came, which was in the early 1970s. Our son was only about 2 at that time. And we would walk into town every night after dinner, or if we'd go out for dinner, we'd still walk into town. And the sweet shop used to be on Main Street, and we'd get an ice cream cone. Both kids would get an ice cream cone. And then my son Adam would inevitably, he would take the first lick of his ice cream cone and the ice cream would fall on the sidewalk.
Of course.
And then he would cry and he wanted another one, but the rule was 1 per night. We weren't going to go back and get another one. So anyway, my grandchildren are now growing up loving Nantucket too. So.
But what stood out with Nantucket for you?
I don't know. I think part of it is the sky. I've always lived in places where there are tall trees, and somehow in Nantucket where it's just so open and you can always see the sky, and I love the beaches, and I think Nantucket's a very special place.
You have a job here?
I do.
What's your work?
Well, for many years I worked at the Whaling Museum as part of the Nantucket Historical Association. And then I retired about 1.5 years, 2 years ago. And then I decided that retirement wasn't for me. I still wanted to be busy. So I took a job at the Research Library, which is part of the Nantucket Historical Association. So now I have a completely different job than I had before, but I like it very much.
Did you ever get promoted, or did you ever get your job move around?
When I first started in 2000 at the NHA, I just worked at a couple of the sites. I worked at the Oldest House, and I worked at Hadwin House, and started doing walking tours, and then I started working more in the museum. If you've been to the museum, I used to do the whale hunt and the Essex Gam, and then I became the manager of that department. And I liked that too, but then I finally decided it was time for a change.
How do you contribute to this community of Nantucket?
Well, I feel I really do right now, especially in this new job at the Research Library, because we frequently get a lot of questions. We have researchers come in, and I help them find the materials that they would like to see, whether they're working on their PhD or if they're writing a book, or maybe it's just a local person who wants to know more about their genealogy, or they may want to know more about the area they live in or the house they live in. It's all the history of the island, and I have a pretty good background on the history of Nantucket.
Speaking of history of Nantucket, what's your favorite artifact of Nantucket?
Oh, that's a good one. I think, well, the artifact that means the most to me, if you're familiar with the story of the whale ship Essex, which was what Moby Dick was really based on, but the Essex was struck by a whale, and the ship went down, and the men escaped into a small boat. And it's a very sad, very dramatic story. But one of the very few survivors of the 20 men who were on the Essex was a man named Benjamin Lawrence. And when he was on the whale boat that he had escaped to with 3 or 4 other men, he collected every day small fibers, hairs, anything he could find, and wove it into this tiny little string. And it's the only real artifact we have from the Essex, because he brought that back to Nantucket, and he said, if I ever get back to Nantucket alive, this is a memento of the horrible ordeal we've been through, because they went through a horrible ordeal. You can imagine, they were starving, they didn't have enough water, it was a horrible ordeal. So it's a very meaningful artifact to me.
Is there a favorite, place on the island?
Oh gosh, I don't know, that's a good question. I love the whole island. I guess, well, I live on the western end of the island, so that would be my favorite area. And we often go to the beach that you go over the Massasoit Bridge and go out Red Barn Road, and that's kind of our favorite beach out there. And of course, we have a beautiful town, so lots of favorite places.
What, thing on Nantucket, brings you, joy?
Well, whenever I come home. If I've been away for even just a few days or maybe a month, just coming in on the ferry and coming around Brant Point, I just feel like I'm home.
I just came back from a trip yesterday, so I know that feeling.
It is. It's a nice feeling.
Yeah.
You've probably read the book. I hope you've read the book, 2 Pennies Overboard. Have you ever read that book?
I don't think so.
It's a child's book, but I used to read it to my kids, and it talks about when you leave Nantucket, you throw 2 pennies overboard at Brant Point, and that guarantees that you'll come back.
Oh.
So I kind of feel like I should also throw 2 pennies overboard when I come back.
Yeah. But then again, that's just literally throwing away money. So.
Right, that's true.
Plus, if you do a lot of trips, then it starts to add up.
Right.
But are there any books that you really like that are about Nantucket?
There are many books that are great about Nantucket, I think. Probably my favorite is In the Heart of the Sea. Such a dramatic story, but also Away Offshore is a wonderful overall history of Nantucket. And as a matter of fact, I'm going to be attending a class over the next 3 or 4 weeks, and we're really going to delve into Away Offshore. So it's a good review of Nantucket history. I'm also a big fan of the book Moby Dick.
Oh, yeah.
Which I read when I was probably your age and didn't like it. But then as an adult and learning more and more about Nantucket, Moby Dick has become much more meaningful to me.
Are there any documentaries that you like?
I don't know of any documentaries that I've watched about Nantucket. We did go this year to the Nantucket's Got Talent, and that was interesting just to see what talent there is on Nantucket, and I thought there was some great acts, so that was good. I've also done some filming for the Nantucket Historical Association. So myself and one of my colleagues, we did something called A Walk Up Main Street, and it's available on YouTube. So it talks about the history of Nantucket. It starts down near the wharf and walks up Main Street and talks about the houses on Nantucket and the history of the island. And I did another walking tour type thing, which talks about the women of Nantucket. And Nantucket does have some really extraordinary women in our past and in our present. But that's a very interesting topic to me. I like learning more about the women of Nantucket. Because everybody talks about whaling days, and it was the men who went to sea and the men who brought wealth to the island, but the women were very important.
Did you always have a love for history?
I've always liked history a lot. I was actually a French and English major in college, but I've always loved history, and I like reading a lot of historical novels and nonfiction also. I loved the book 1,000 Leagues of Blue, which was written by a Nantucket author, but based on history.
Do you have any pets?
I do. I have a golden retriever whose name is Fisher. He's about 8.5 years old. He's a beautiful dog, but he's always been a bit of a handful. We've always had golden retrievers, and our last golden retriever before Fisher was extremely well behaved and just a great dog. Fisher we love dearly, but he's still kind of a challenge sometimes. If somebody leaves their shoes on the floor, he will pick up their shoes and carry them off somewhere.
You're like, these are mine now.
Yeah, exactly. Do you have a pet?
I do. Her name is Tika, and she is a yellow lab, and she is adorable.
Oh, good. And how old is she?
She's 8 years old.
Oh, well, see, about the same as Fisher.
Yeah.
Yeah. Better behaved than Fisher?
She can be like active, but she can also be like just like lying down on the ground, just like sleeping.
Right. I think most dogs sleep most of the day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there any like things that you saw change?
I think things have really changed. In some cases, changed for the better. Some cases, maybe not so much. But when we first started coming to Nantucket, like there were not as many fancy restaurants in Nantucket. We used to go to a place called the Skipper, where there were college students who would serve dinner and then sing musicals, songs from musicals. We used to go to a place called Vincent's, which just served basically spaghetti. And another place we went to was the North Shore. So those types of places seem to be mostly gone. Not as many family-style restaurants as I remember. But some things are better. I think the bike paths are better. We have bike paths all over the island. That's great. I like the bus service, so that hopefully that eliminates some of the cars and the parking problems in town. So there's been a lot of changes, but as I say, some for the better, maybe some for the worse.
So is there anything you'd like to add?
Well, let me think a minute here. I just think we're extremely lucky to live on this island. It's a beautiful island, and as we talked about, there have been changes, but when I think about the changes everywhere else in the world, the world is changing, and obviously Nantucket is bound to change too, but it's still my favorite place.
Yeah, it's still the boomerang-shaped island we know and love.
It is, exactly. Right. Where else can you walk on the beach for miles and probably not see another soul? Especially in the dead of winter, but right, right.
Thank you for coming here today, and I hope you have an amazing day.
Well, thank you. Thank you, and you were a very good interviewer, and thank you for asking me so many questions. It was fun.